Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to round 11 of the Formula Alpha Championship. We are here at Yas Marina this evening, of course. The championship finale of the Formula 1 2022 season being completed here just a few days ago. And we're here to have our own crack at it on the different layout. Of course, we're going for the more old school, more traditional layout of the chicane at turn 6 and turn 7, with the slightly older style turn 9 as well. I will admit the newer style turn 9 seems to be very, or what would be turn 8 now, I believe, because of course that isn't a chicane at turn 6-7. I've got all my track numbers wrong, going between two corners. So it will be turn 9 down at the start of Sector 3, which has been tweaked in the new layout. But we are here on the old one anyway, and it is currently Will Inglis leading this qualifying session, just over 8 minutes to go, as he's posted a 1:49.4, so he's in on provisional pole at the moment. Of course, P2 in the championship, 20 points between him and Alan Matthews, so this will be a very important qualifying pole position indeed. Second place is Alan Matthews himself, only 0.6 of a second down there, and he really wants to close that gap up at this stage in qualifying to try and have a shot at pole position here, although he is still in good stead on that front row of the grid. With 20 points between them, it could go, it will be the deciding round, this round here at Yas Marina, unless they get a victory each, or they score the same number of points, or don't score any points at all. Of course, they will be scoring some points, in which case it will go on to round 12, Las Vegas, our finale for this year in a fortnight's time, which will be exciting to see, not only the final round of the season, but a new track as well, as we go down to P3. Paul Millman, P3 overall in the session, very nice job there, leading the AM, running 150.787, sees him, as I mentioned, in third and pole in the AM field. And then we have a bit of a break to Paul Brady there, 153.3, as he is P2 in the AM running. Then we have Rob Whitney P3 and Steve Knight P4. So not that many cars from the pro field just yet, so we'll want to see a few more join. Of course, we can usually expect the likes of Matt Daly to turn up fairly late into qualifying if he is indeed running this evening, which we haven't seen too much of Matt in the single-seater, perhaps focusing his efforts a little bit more on the touring car running. As we now go on board with Paul Brady heading through what is turn 7. We're just going to say turn 7. It's turn 6, turn 7 and turn 8, this complex of corners, but just for security's sake, we'll say turn 7, covers all bases then. Paul Brady, I was watching just before we jumped in there, but having a couple of issues by the looks of things at the very end of Sector 3. I think a couple of cars are, as they turn down the downforce to get the best run down that long back straight, and I think that is compromising the back end of the car a little bit, heading through that final corner. It catches you out, catches a few drives out, caught a few drives out in the Formula 1 running as well, so we should be seeing some of that in the racing as well, which would be very exciting indeed, as we stay on board with Paul Brady here to see if he can improve on his time. He hasn't found any time yet on this lap. Jack Hodson has. He joins the running. We can't unfortunately go on board with him just yet, but he's posted a 153.1 with just over 5 minutes to go in this session. So we watch Paul Brady then head around the final corner in just a moment's time. Wants to clip, they just kiss the curb ever so slightly, run over the curb on corner exit. Doesn't go too hard over there, because I think that is what was catching him out a few times. And there we see Paul Brady up into P4 in this session then with a 152.7. Very nice improvements over the previous lap. That was pretty much all made in Sector 3, I believe. No, it wasn't, in fact. They were all not personal best sectors, but it was just a very well strung together lap for Paul Brady there. As we go back on board with Will Inglis, let's see what he does heading down into Sector 1, but we are of course wary of what is going on with Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews going personal best through Sector 1 with a 34.674. Let's see what he does now as we head down towards turn 9 in just a moment's time. Of course, we have the chicane to negotiate first. There is, of course, another corner here. Of course, I'm looking at the wrong diagram once again. In between the qualifying and race 1, I will bring up the correct diagram. And that was actually a purple Sector 2 for Alan Matthews there. Fantastic effort from him. Let's see if he can string it together now at the end of the lap, heading under the hotel here as Jack Hodson's time registers a 152.4. And the back end of Alan Matthews' car just stepping out there. I believe that was at turn 14. Which is a bit of a shame now as we see him heading around the final corner. The car looking entirely planted, it must be said. Is he abandoning this lap? I don't think he is. No, he's not. He's going for it as he comes across the line now. What time of the poster is a 149.4. That is his best lap of the race, or best lap of the session so far, and it was, of course, very close indeed to Will Inglis' time. So if he can string that together with this tidier Sector 3, I think we're in for quite the fight for pole position here in qualifying, because that Sector 2 is absolutely ballistic. It just happens sometimes in these sessions where you just all of a sudden you really just settle into a rhythm, you really click with the circuit, and that seems to be the case for Alan Matthews through Sector 2 there. As we head now down towards the end of the lap here with Will Inglis, very end of the lap in fact, as we watch him head around the final corner. A bit of front end push from the car in fact, not sure what went on there as he comes across the line. It's a 149.8, so nothing to write home about for Will Inglis. I would still have him P2 in the session there if he weren't to be on pole at the moment. Something happening with Paul Brady's car there, he was going through the sky by the looks of things, as Paul Millman is clearly enjoying himself in the AM running there. He's very much ahead of everyone else. There is Jack Hodson now in P5. I think that was that Jack or that Rob that we saw kind of squirreling about a little bit on track. Steve Knight appears to be under the ground, and I was about to say it's a repeat of Alton Park in the old Alpha 1750 GTAs, but then I remembered, of course, Yas Marina has the rather interesting pit exit, and in fact Steve Knight's made it more interesting by bouncing over the curbs and destroying the underside of the car, so I'm not sure the race engineers will be particularly happy with that one, as we now see Paul Millman coming across the line to take a, what time is that? That is a 2 minute 38.3, because that is an outlap for Paul Millman. This certainly is an outlap though for Will Inglis, as we watch him now heading down through Sector 2. Personal best of, in fact, a purple Sector 1 of 34.2, about 4 tenths clear of what we've seen from some of the other quick drivers in this session so far. Watching them now heading through towards the end of Sector 2. In fact, we are now at the end of Sector 2, and it is for Will Inglis. What time is that? We'll find out in just a moment, as we see him improving once again. Or no, in fact, he's lost out through Sector 2, but still has a little bit of an advantage as we head now into the final part of the lap. And of course, this will matter, even though it is only 300ths of a second. That will really be quite important to him, because the margins between him and Alan Matthews are so close. There's only 400ths of a second separating the two as we speak. So that will pretty much double his advantage over him. So he'll be very happy to take this lap, even if it isn't blisteringly clip. He will have to carry on if he wants to try and get another lap here, because he won't have an opportunity to enter the pit, and he's absolutely nailed Sector 3 has Will Inglis. That sees him go 3 tenths faster. A 1 minute 49.1 sees him 3 tenths clear of Alan Matthews now. So just when Alan Matthews thought he was getting closer, Will Inglis responding to that charge from behind and looking comfortable once again. We have 1 minute to go in the lap now, so these cars who are currently on their quick laps will have the option of pitting and seeing how they fare, or going for one final fast lap attempt. And is anyone on an outlap at the moment? I think Steve Knight might have just started a new lap, so he's the first car to be coming across the line with no more opportunities for a lap, as we see Rob Whitney in fact joining him there at 153.1, so an improvement for Rob there. Steve Knight now heads through Sector 1. Where is he now? We're going to go and try and follow him through the rest of this lap. He's heading through Turn 3, Turn 4. Or what would be... No, it would still be Turn 3, Turn 4 at this part of the lap. I really do need to find an improved track diagram. I will do that in just a moment now, as we watch Steve Knight head down that mile-long straight towards Turn 7, as we have decided to name it. And he's looking in quite comfortable stead, it must be said. Very clear indeed around this rather large circuit. Steve Knight, one of the quickest cars on track in a straight line. In fact, 290 kilometers an hour for his car, slowest car on track in terms of outright top end speed, 278 kilometers an hour. That's Paul Millman, and he currently sat in P3, or has now in fact disconnected from the session. Feels like there's nothing more he can do in this one really, as we're going on board in fact with Will Inglis. Will Inglis coming towards the end of his lap once again, has made an improvement through Sector 2, perhaps as a response to what went on to the car to the car behind, being Alan Matthews, improving in Sector 2 immensely. And into the 148 region goes Will Inglis, and that must be secure now for him at this stage in this qualifying session, unless we have a late charge from Alan Matthews. We've seen it happen before. We've seen Alan Matthews pull it out the bag through Sector 2 in this session alone, as we see Jack Cotton in that very nice liveried car there, heading, I believe that used to be the livery that Andrew Whitehead used to run, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, yeah, Boosted Motorsport. That is Andrew Whitehead's car there. I'm not sure if that's on my end or if that is a choice that has been made. If it is a choice that has been made, very good choice indeed. I approve of the livery, as we will be staying on board with. In fact, we're going to jump on board with Alan Matthews, because we'll watch watch Jack Hodson head through towards the end of the lap as he completes his. As we now see, where is Alan Matthews? Alan Matthews heading through Sector 3 as we speak. No improvement so far on this lap. In fact, is this lap an outlap? No, it is not, of course. I'm now heading underneath that very expensive hotel. I imagine a night stay. They're not cheap at all, as Rob, when he disconnects from the session as well. And we watch the car going a little bit wide there and heading through the final corner. And we'll be very wary of any oversteer here for Alan Matthews. He comes across the line. Will it be an improvement? It's not, unfortunately, for him. It's in the low 150s. So a scruffy lap to end qualifying for Alan Matthews there. What a shame. It didn't quite come together. And now we see Jack Hodson come across the line to improve there. He goes 151.1. Hasn't quite beat Paul Millman's time. So Paul Millman's still on pole position in the AM running. But there is Jack Hodson going up into P2 there. So nice effort all round for the drivers there. And congratulations, Will. That is provisional pole. In fact, it's no longer provisional pole. That is now pole position for race 1, which is coming up in just a few minutes' time, so don't go anywhere. Also, just before I do leave, I think that noise is my Alpha 75 revving itself death, so I do apologise for that one. If anyone knows anyone who can do an engine rebuild, that'd be very much appreciated. Right, a few minutes' time for race 1. And welcome back to the action, ladies and gentlemen, here at Yas Marina. Just quick thank you to Greg for pointing out the audio issues. Hopefully all resolved now. We're very nearly underway. In fact, we have 6 red lights on the gantry. And we are away. Alan Matthews and Will Inglis having a bit of a battle there, of course, on the Lords. The getaway really mattering for those two. There is, who is that behind as well? That is Steve Knight, in fact, up there with them. In fact, is that? No, that is... who is that? That is Alex Smith, of course. Apologies, Alex. We see Alex Smith in P3 being able to join in with the action, which is good to see. We have 3 cars leading within a second of each other. There is Will Inglis as well, trying to go late on the brakes, trying to hook it around the long way around. It was going to stick, unfortunately, for him, and he's going to have to find a better overtaking opportunity as we run onto the long back straight now. It's going wrong for Jack Hodson there, a little bit too eager on the throttle, perhaps, as he went over the curb. Was able to catch it, which was very impressive indeed. I was expecting that to be in the wall, as all the cars there, the halos, or rather the air intakes, all flashing with that green LED to signify they're using that push-to-pass system down that long back straight, which isn't too much of a surprise, really, is it? As we now see them heading through turn 7. And it is Alan Matthews who leads this race. Will Inglis P2, Alex Smith P3, and there is Will Inglis, I think, having a bit of a bump, was that? No, that was Paul Millman. Paul Millman, a bit of a concertina effect happening there, and he was kind of sandwiched in the middle of it. That upset the car, of course, and he's now finding himself facing the wrong direction and in last place, which is a shame to see. An impressive qualifying run, of course, coming to a bit of a premature end there. Let's see what he can do in the rest of this race, or potentially the reverse grid race as well. Meanwhile, Will Inglis currently in P2, half a second behind, still has his sights very much set on Alan Matthews, as does Alex Smith. In fact, has his sights set on both of these cars. We have seen in the past Alex Smith able to capitalise on the errors of the cars in front. We've also seen the opposite happen, where Alex Smith has led for a considerable distance for it all unravelling towards the end of the race. So let's see, will it be one of those two possibilities? Hopefully neither. Hopefully we just have a nice clean race as we come towards the end of the first lap now. These cars posting in the high 40s or low 50s in terms of lap time, so we should have a good number of laps in this race. As we see Will Inglis, Alan Matthews all heading down towards turn 1, and once again the order not changing between these top 3. Is there anything else going on further down the order? And there is, in fact, it is Paul Brady getting ahead of Rob. In fact, looking at trying to get ahead of Rob Woody, but not quite doing it just yet. These 2 cars still very close indeed. These 2 cars are, in fact, the closest cars on track so far. So the battling then all happening for the lead of this race. Alan Matthews, with an impressive getaway, was able to make up for any shortcomings in qualifying, and is now left Will Inglis with all the work to do, really, for the big bucks, for the glory of the top step of the podium, as we see the push-to-pass system in full effect once again. In fact, very much in effect for Will Inglis, as we see him gaining substantially on the brake. That might have been under the braking zone, in fact, heading in to turn 7. Unfortunately, the camera not providing us the best angle to see that at, but we're going to head down towards the end of sector 2, and Alan Matthews still leads this race. Meanwhile, further down the order, in fact, there is a bit of a battle going on between Rob Whitney and Paul Brady here. They're looking very close indeed as they entered the braking zone into turn 7. Seem to have separated out just a little bit. Do we have a reason to explain that? We very well could do, because Rob Whitney has an absolute rocket ship in a straight line. It appears 295 kilometres an hour for Rob Whitney's car in the straights there, which is quicker than anyone else on track. In fact, the nearest cars are the likes of Alex Smith or Will Inglis. Slowest car on track in terms of top speed at the moment is, in fact, Paul Millman or Paul Brady. So we're seeing a battle of the setups here, potentially, as well. Not only a battle of raw driver talent, but where the cars might be stronger on different parts of the lap. We saw Mercedes in the Formula 1 race that has just occurred on Sunday. We saw Mercedes trying to opt for a higher downforce setup to try and make up for any kind of, well, to try and have a strength in the corners. They realised that the car wasn't going to be able to do it down the straights, so they tried to make up for it in the corners. Unfortunately, that higher downforce setup wasn't enough to cope with the outright pace of some of the other cars running a low drag setup at the circuit. So interesting to see how those cars running alternate setups might fare in this race. Everyone, speaking of alternate setups or strategies, everyone in this race not opting for one of them in terms of tyres. Everyone running the soft compound tyre. Alex Smith then currently in P3, losing out a little bit perhaps on the exit of that corner. Still is very much within a shout of it. He's doing quite a nice job as in now, in fact, within a second, in fact. I'd say he's gaining substantially in that slipstream there. He might have absolutely nailed this one. Apologies, Alex. I said I thought you'd lost out, but that doesn't seem to be the case, because under braking, up the inside there goes Alex Smith into P2 and defending this corner nicely. In fact, backing Will Inglis up somewhat, and that could be absolutely detrimental to Will Inglis's race at this stage. He's going to try and find a way past is Will Inglis, but it might be too little too late, because we have the next braking zone coming up for the next complex of chicanes. He does in fact get ahead, does Will Inglis, using that push to pass system at just the right time. Perfect use of it, very well calculated indeed. Gets that position back, which is absolutely what we like to see. Some fantastic overtaking going on between these two cars then. Meanwhile, this is allowing Alan Matthews to break away in the lead of this race. His lead looking a little bit more comfortable now, so these two cars might be wanting to say to each other, you know, Alex and Will, maybe let's work together. Let's ignore each other for a little while and just focus on setting some good laps and getting closer to that car in the lead of the race once again, because as it stands at the moment, this is the most comfortable margin that Alan Matthews has had so far in this race, and he's, I'm sure, quite glad to see it. Meanwhile, you've got comfortable margins, not too comfortable really between Rob Whitney and Paul Brady. We've seen it's almost like an accordion, the concertina effect in full effect once again, to quote a certain Formula 1 commentator. And it just seems to be that the gap is extending to about 7 to 8 tenths at some point, but then closing right back up once again. And in all of this battling, we can't count out Steve Knight. Steve Knight's had some good pace in this race so far, and he's very much on the back end of Paul Brady or Rob Whitney. And yeah, very much within a shout of this in the Ammerling. Speaking of the Ammerling, Jack Hodson is absolutely dominating it as we speak. It must be said, he is about 8 seconds clear of the likes of Rob Whitney or Paul Brady, and doing a very nice job of leading that AM race. If anything goes wrong at the front end of the field, he could be within a shout of leading the AM race with a spot on the podium on the road. Very impressive indeed. As we now head into the midway stage of this race, Will Inglis still in P2 for the time being. Alex Smith has dropped off quite substantially, it must be said. Maybe he's been working those soft tyres hard to catch up to the cars up in front, or maybe he's just trying to preserve them for another push later on in the race. For whatever reason, he is dropping off from those cars in front, and this now leaves Will Inglis to catch back up to Alan Matthews. In fact, what we might be seeing is just Will Inglis really quite charged up now, really wanting to find a way past Alan Matthews. Saw Alan Matthews getting away with him, decided to ignore pretty much what was going on behind him, and instead focus on the battle for the lead. If that is the case, it's certainly worked, because now we're getting ready for another battle for the lead as we head towards the end of this lap. Only half a second separating these two cars now. And Alan Matthews might have had a lap or two to breathe a sigh of relief, but that has any kind of feeling of that has waned, and now there's only 0.2 of a second separating him as head round the final corner. Once again, a 150.3 for Alan Matthews, a 149.2 for Will Inglis, the fastest lap of the race so far. That is a blistering lap. That would have seen him in P1 in qualifying. In fact, no, it would have seen him in P1 in qualifying. Yes, it would have. Apologies for my memory already fading, apparently. But that would have been a very impressive charge in qualifying nonetheless. And he's done it with a decent tank of fuel on board the car and not the freshest set of boots in race. One very impressive indeed for Alan Matthews, or for Will Inglis rather. Speaking of high drag cars, we're going to go on board with the high suspension setup, high downforce setup of Paul Millman here, 280 kilometers an hour down that back straight. We'll see actually. How is he looking in terms of Sector 3, Sector 1? Well, he's up there with the likes of Steve Knight, in fact beating Paul Brady, Jack Hodson, matching Jack Hodson and Alex Smith. So the car clearly in Sector 1, Sector 3, the more twisty sections of this circuit, to give it the technical term, is looking very impressive indeed. But is he sacrificing too much pace through Sector 2 to really make the difference? He's currently running in P7, which is lower than the last position. Not sure. Apologies, Rob. I'm not quite sure what went on there in your race. Drop back now behind the likes of Paul Brady. Paul Brady now into P2 in the AM running. But we'll see now how the likes of Paul Millman and Rob Whitney work their way up through the field. Meanwhile, speaking of trying to work his way up through the field, we're going to go back aboard once again with Will Inglis for the lead of this race. Of course, this absolutely matters, this overtake. This is for the championship. Every overtake you see now between these two, in fact every overtake you see these two doing, even if it's not against them, is all for this all-important championship. With only 20 points between the two, with only 2 minutes to go. We're already, of course, in round 1 of, or race 1 of one of those rounds. Willing this really wants that points advantage. 7 points between these two as things stand in Alan Matthews' favour. So Alan Matthews been able to build up that gap as things stand, which is not what Willingness wants to see. Stay on board with Willingness, and as he heads down that back straight, not using that push-to-pass system yet. So has Willingness got a bit of a trick up his sleeve? Has he found something that works? If he has, apologies, Will, in case anyone else in the field is watching and has it on in the background. I might have just spoiled that one for you, because I believe Willingness is waiting towards the end of this part of the circuit to use that push-to-pass system. At least he did when battling Alex Smith. We haven't seen him use it down that back straight, unless I'm completely blind, which I'm not ruling out. Willingness not looking like he needs it, to be honest. In fact, as we head through Sector 3 now, looking very much competitive with Alan Matthews. So then watching them heading onto the next lap, and we see Alan Matthews responding to that charge from behind a 1:49.7. That is his best lap of the race so far. Ultimate best lap pace goes to Willingness with that lap that we saw earlier on. About half a second now between those 2 laps, but we're now seeing Alan Matthews, who's been very consistent indeed at this stage in the race. We're now seeing him breaking into the 1:49s. Half a second separating these 2 cars still. Meanwhile, Paul Brady and Steve Knight, there's a battle going on between them as we head down the start-finish straight. Steve Knight using that push-to-pass system, heading into turn 1. Steve Knight potentially having a look up the inside there, but wasn't going to make the move done, or wasn't going to get the move done rather from that far back. Paul Brady defending with all of his might now, has a bit of breathing space as we head through turn 2, turn 3 and turn 4, because it's very difficult indeed to follow. There you have the dirtier of the car up in front, the car being pretty much unloaded heading over the crest of that hill. The grip very hard to come by indeed, and that allows the car in front to have a bit of breathing space, but not for long though, especially if you nail the exit of this corner, as we see the Amarillas bunched up once again. And this is going to be very important indeed, this next braking zone, as we head down towards turn 8 and turn 9. Of course, I have now got the correct track diagram up, and I said I'd call it turn 7 to be safe, which was completely wrong, because turn 7 is at the very start of sector 2. Of course, this is turn 8, turn 9 and turn 10, so even with my best guess is completely wrong still. As we see Paul Brady still leading this trio, Steve Knight P2 and Paul Millman in P3. Speaking of still leading, Alan Matthews still leading this race as we head down towards the end of the lap for these 2 drivers. On the lead lap, of course, we've just hit the halfway stage of this race. Willingness going a little bit wide on exit there. Is he using the push-and-pass system at this stage of the lap? No, not here, but we'll have to see where he uses it now as we start another lap. Both posting a near enough identical lap time there, only 500ths of a second separating the 2. So they really have, Alan Matthews has responded to that charge from behind and responded well, putting the pressure on his Willingness there. As Steve Knight has found a way past, Paul Brady clearly put enough pressure on to get that overtake done. Of course, all important and championship points are going on here. We will, of course, give a brief update on the championships as they stand at the moment in just a few minutes' time. Alan Matthews then leading this race still by about 0.6 of a second. Anyone using that push-to-pass system just yet? No, not quite. Maybe we are preserving a little bit, maybe looking after the engines. We don't have that as a major concern, but you never know. In fact, I think the only time we've ever had that as a concern really is the Julia GTIMs from last year, which would have a small tendency to blow up an engine or two earlier on in the season. And there we see Willingness using that push-to-pass system now. Only 0.2 of a second separating them. He's having a look round the outside. He's near enough side by side on the braking, but Alan Matthews has that inside for the left-hander. Defended well there. He's able to break away from him, heading through turn 12 and turn 13, and is looking very comfortable once again. In fact, that margin building up to a much wider margin than what we've seen over the past few laps. Only 10 minutes to go in this race already, so now we'll give a brief update on the championships as they stand. So it is Alan Matthews leading this race and leading the championship. 20 points behind him is Willie Bliss in P2 in the championship and the race as well. Then we have Alex Smith in P3 in the championship and P3 in the race. Well, that's going very nicely indeed, isn't it? Then Barry Clayton, unfortunately not able to make it this evening, I believe stuck in traffic. Excuses, racing driver excuses, I call it, Barry. And then we have Andrew Rammer P5, John Baker P6, George Patsby P7, James Atkins P8, Andrew Harvey P9, Matt Daly P10, Mike Smith P11, and Andrew Whitehead P12. We are very much keeping an eye on what is going on between these two on track here, as we see Alan Matthews heading down towards turn 5 once again, and has got a slightly more comfortable gap to Willingness behind at half a second, which feels a bit odd saying, but is more comfortable than what he's been used to so far. Then in the AM running, where things are equally as interesting at the top end, we have Rob Whitney, unfortunately last in this race, but first in the AM Championship, 2 points clear of Paul Moman. So Paul Moman, as things stand, will be at least neck and neck with Rob Whitney heading into race 2. So very important weekend for the AM runners as well as the pro runners. Then we have Paul Brady P3. He is currently P4 in the P5 in the P4 in the AM running in this race rather. And then we have Guy Swarwick 210 points P4, and then we have Steve Knight P5 136 points, and Jack Hodson on 33 points. Jack Hodson entering the single-seater running late this year, I believe, or not able to attend many rounds, unfortunately for him. Instead, he's been much more focused on the touring car running. He's doing a very nice job in that indeed. So we'll see what kind of pace Jack Hodson has in a single-seater later on, late in this season. Could be very spiky indeed for next year's running, which, of course, if you're part of the Alpha Male Racing League's Facebook group, which I thoroughly recommend you join, is being decided, or being informed upon by some polls currently there in the group, so make sure you take part in them if you haven't already. We'll have some slight tweaks rather to the running for the touring car next year, as well I believe we will have a different calendar, of course, for the single-seater running. So all exciting, all change. Of course, in between the two seasons, we will have some festive running as well, some special events, which will be very interesting indeed. Meanwhile, 0.3 of a second separating Willie Bliss and Alan Matthews, even less than that separating Steve Knight, Paul Millman, and Paul Brady rather. Very close indeed between these three, so we just might have to divert our attention away from the leaders for just a brief moment. Unfortunately, apologies to the race leaders for that one. But we go on board with Steve Knight once again as he goes a little bit wide on corner. Actually, have to be very careful there, not because we're trying to say gaining an unfair advantage or pushing track limits too far or whatever, but just have to be careful that the back end of the car isn't going to break away from you, as we've seen happen on a number of occasions now. Heading into turn 1, Steve Knight looking a little bit more planted than the car behind there. Paul Mullen in P6 and Paul Brady in P7. It's just so difficult on this layout of the circuit, at least, to follow the cars behind, as it appears. Even these cars not running ultra high levels of downforce in comparison to the likes of F1 cars, or these F1 cars pre this year. The dirtier effect is very strong indeed, although it may be helping some cars' top speed performances, as I want to mention that Alan Matthews is running an absolute drag race, and much like Rob Whitney, 297 kilometers an hour through the speed traps for Alan Matthews. They're absolutely flying along. Has he been potentially in response to Willing Bliss, that car behind, who qualified on pole, unfortunately lost it on the lead on the very start of the race, and hasn't been able to find a way past just yet, with just over 5 minutes to go in this race now. as we see Steve Knight and Paul Millman trading blows, because I believe there was in fact contact between the two there. I think that was into the braking zone, and they just made contact, unfortunately for Paul Millman. That offset the car and sent him flying off the circuit. So Paul Millman now back down in last position in this race, which is of course optimal for Rob Whitney. We are now witnessing the battle for the AM Championship lead going on here, and currently it's going the way of Rob Whitney. So Paul Millman will be very eager to try and get this overtake completed. So in the final 5 minutes, I think we can have a number of interesting battles to stay on board. As we head through turn 1 now, it is Paul Millman on the back foot here, and will lose a little bit more time. Of course, as we mentioned already, sector 1 just so difficult to follow the car in front from. And we now see that Rob Whitney is about 6 tenths of a second ahead, which is a little bit more of a wider margin than what we had earlier, or rather late in the previous lap. Let's see now, let's watch and compare their two cars' performances in a straight line as we head down that long back straight. Rob Whitney using that push-to-pass system to try and give himself a more comfortable margin heading into the next braking zone of turn 8. And now we see that he in fact has a very comfortable margin indeed. Meanwhile, just in front of then, Paul Brady and Steve Knight battling it out. Paul Brady in fact getting ahead of Steve Knight eventually. Steve Knight just had to relent and allow Paul Brady past. Go back and board once again with Will Inglis, 7 tenths of a second separating these two as we run down towards turn 8 in fact, and all 3 cars there on the podium using that push-to-pass system. It has been a fantastic race actually for Alex Smith. I just want to give mention to that. But all this battling has been going on. He's quietly just been enjoying his lapping. In fact, I think him and Jack Holton are rather probably a little bit bored because it has been a very there is in fact confirmation that is Andrew Whitehead's livery, but yeah, there must be just ever so slightly a little bit bored there, because it has been a very, well, I say comfortable, it probably won't be that comfortable, blistering Arabian heat and some very high G-forces, but yeah, it must be a little bit more dull than the likes of Will Inglis or Alan Matthews have been enjoying, because they had very little to do. Instead, they've just been settling in and setting some very consistent lap times indeed. As we see Will Inglis dropping back ever so slightly. Have we seen Will Inglis within the last I don't know, 8 laps even escape outside of 1 second behind Alan Matthews? I don't think so. I think he has been absolutely on the ball. Has been a very impressive drive from him, and of course if the order stays the way it is at the moment, we will see Will Inglis ahead of Alan Matthews on the start, as we did in race 1 in fact, and that will allow Will Inglis another opportunity to try and get a nose out in front of Alan Matthews and stay there, as he had a very late lunge up the inside there, was too far back though, was never going to work unfortunately for him, and in fact he's going to have to wait for another opportunity. However, we only have pretty much 3 minutes to go in this race, so it'll be interesting to see where he next takes his opportunities. Will he be a little bit more brave, a little bit more desperate? In fact, potentially you don't want to drive too desperate, because that's when it goes really wrong for both parties involved, but we might not start seeing him taking some riskier opportunities to try and get the overtake done, and if he does, it'll be a sight to behold, that is for sure. This battling has allowed Alex Smith to catch back up and is now within 1.5 seconds of the lead of this race. Meanwhile, I'm trying to join on board with Paul Millman and Rob Whitney, but unfortunately the camera system just not allowing me to just yet. Very close indeed though. Paul Millman is ahead, goes wide though through the penultimate corner, but that might give him enough of a margin ahead of Rob Whitney to stay there, as we now see Steve Knight in fact having an issue there on the final corner. That is one way of putting it, and facing the wrong direction, dropped back down to last position. What a shame. Been a fantastic race for him so far, and unfortunately it's all gone wrong in one of the final few laps in fact, as we go back aboard with winning this once again. And 7 tenths of a second separating him and Alan Matthews, which again, one of the wider margins we've seen between him and Alan Matthews. Very impressive indeed. And there is Alex Smith in the background, not too far behind at all. If something happens between these two, do not count Alex Smith out for a shot at the lead of this race. Meanwhile, Paul Millen and Rob Whitney still battling it out as we head down towards Sector 3 with these two cars. Rob Whitney this time on the back foot, but very much keen to get an overtake completed. We compare their best laps of the race so far. 155. No apologies, it's 153.1 for Rob Whitney and a 152.3 for Paul Milman. So in terms of outright pace, Paul Milman has the upper hand, and that is reflected in current pace as well. 154.0 for Paul Milman and 155.0 for Rob Whitney. In terms of current pace at the moment for the leaders of this race, which of course is a very exciting battle indeed, it is Alan Matthews who is in the lead at the moment with a 1 minute 49.8 in terms of current pace, matched in fact pretty much identically by Willing Glisses, and then in terms of best lap, 149.7 and 149.2 respectively for those two drivers, which we've seen earlier on in the race. So usually we have a bit of a kind of a bell curve effect, or an inverse bell curve, whatever you call it. So perhaps, I don't know, I'm not a scientist. It shows, but where you'd see the pace of the car drop off at the midway stage when the tyres are no longer fresh. We've still got a decent amount of fuel on board, and then the car gets quite a lot lighter, and especially if the driver has preserved the tyres are still in relatively good stead, you'll see a bit of an uptick in pace, especially with the track rubbering in as well, and we just haven't seen that here at this Yas Marina circuit. It seems to be a bit of a struggle to the finish for some cars. In fact, has anyone posted their best lap on the previous lap? No, it's not looked to be the case. In fact, their previous lap's some way out from their best laps. But now, speaking of best laps, this is going to have to be Willing Glisses' best lap if you want to try and get that overtake completed now, because we are now on the final lap of this race, and it is Alan Matthews who still leads, heading now down towards Sector 2 in just a moment's time. Half a second separating them as we enter the first braking zone of, in fact, the first chicane of the lap. Chicane, of course, designed to take the cars from one of the highest speeds on the circuit to one of the absolute lowest. This circuit is absolutely full of them, which has drawn criticism in the past, but I think it's delivered an exciting race so far this evening. Of course, we have the reverse grid race to hopefully deliver some more excitement in just a few minutes' time. Jack Hodson, we mentioned him already, very much going on quite a nice pace indeed, still setting personal best laps at this stage in the race. He is potentially the only, in fact is the only driver who is still posting his best laps this late on in the race. So right as I make comments about the track and the cars slightly dropping off in terms of pace, he just goes and disproves it. So thank you, Jack, for assisting. I won't say you've maybe looked rather ignorant, because I do that myself. I completely do that myself. As we see Willing Gliss going a little bit wide there potentially, and that could cost him in this race. So we're going to stay on board with Alan Matthews, who has driven an absolutely fantastic race, it must be said. Didn't get pole position, but took the lead of the race very early on indeed. Absolutely nailed the launch, and there, that really set a precedent. He has absolutely dominated, well, not dominated, but has absolutely driven an impressive drive indeed. He has kept P2 behind from a very close margin indeed. He's really had to work for it, but we now see Alan Matthews heading around that final corner for the last time in race one. He will take the race one victory. Congratulations, Alan, and commiserations, Willing Gliss, for P2 there. Very close indeed. I believe there was only a couple of tenths between the two. We'll have to get our complete race times for you ready for race 2, but they were not too far from a photo finish there. Very impressive drive indeed, and then congratulations, Alex Smith, rounding out the podium with a P3 there. Will we see some Alex Smith donuts? I know Alex Smith is very keen on completing some donuts. We might see some of them, even though it is only race 1. Then we have Jack Hodson in the pits, but he has completed the race. We have Paul Milman, Paul Brady, the next car to finish the race. He's heading into Sector 3 now. As I think Willing Gliss is taking a bit of a rest there. What must have been a very tough race indeed. Likewise, Alan Matthews very slow in lap for him. Alex Smith is still going at a rate of not. He doesn't want the racing to finish. Neither do I, which is why I'm very glad we have race 2 coming up in just a few moments' time. There, as we watch Paul Brady, the AM race leader, he's capitalised on the mistakes, or the errors rather, or misfortunes, in fact, of a few other drivers here. The AM running completely flipping around its head on numerous occasions, but it is Paul Brady who will come out on top in the end and take the AM race victory. Congratulations, Paul. Commiserations, Paul Milman, for what has been a bit of a rollercoaster race for you, really. Some very lows of the back end of the field, followed by some incredible pace for the AM running, and he come home with a well-deserved P2. And rounding out the AM podium is Rob Whitney there, who will, of course, be wanting to score a little bit higher to try and close up or try and make that AM lead just a little bit more secure in race 2, because it's currently obviously it's not looking that way at all, as we see Steve Knight coming home in P7 on the road, and Jack Hodson being classified P8 in the end. So I'm not quite sure if he did in fact make it home in time. It doesn't look like that is the case, unfortunately. We'll work out what went on with that one in just a few minutes, but don't go anywhere, because as I say, in a few minutes we'll have the reverse grid race coming up, so stay where you are. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, here for race 2, the reverse grid race at Yas Marina. We are pretty much ready to go once again. Some very quick turnarounds this evening, or maybe it's my PC being a bit slow. And there is Alex Smith leading the pro, running there on pole with 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away. Who gets the better launch? Unfortunately for Alex, it is Will Inglis who gets a better launch, but even better than that is Alan Matthews, who's pretty much neck and neck heading into turn 1 already. Fantastic effort from him. There's contact between Alex Smith and Will Inglis, putting a stop to the race pretty much immediately. Fortunately, that tagged Paul Brady in with it as well. The rest of the Amarans very, very conscious to avoid that indeed. Very impressive indeed. So Alan Matthews once again leading this race very comfortably, far more comfortably in fact than he did in race 1. Jack Hodson up into P2 and Rob Whitney in P3 at the moment on the road. So some very mixed results from this already, given how the race has started. We head now down the long back straight. And it is Alan Matthews with 1.5 second delta to the car behind, and that is, of course, the Amarant of Jack Hodson, so he's not really going to fight for it. In fact, the next car that's going to fight for it is Alex Smith down in P6, 6 seconds behind the leader of this race. He had a very good recovery indeed, given how much of an impact it was and how early on it was. So to be only 6 seconds behind is impressive. I imagine in a little while, in a short while, we'll see the likes of Alex Smith enjoying or catching up to Alan Matthews once again, or enjoying a battle with him at least. Maybe Will Inglis can get in on it as well. We have some impressive pace from him, and Will Inglis seems to respond well to a challenge, so we'll see what happens later on in this race. He's already up into P5, is Alex Smith, head of Steve Knight now. In fact, the closest cars on the grid at the moment are Paul Millman and Rob Whitney. 0.6 of a second when I first joined them, but now 0.9 of a second. In fact, make that 0.8 of a second. In fact, make that 0.6 of a second once again. So I was right, you see, on board with Rob Whitney. This now is a battle for the lead, or P2 in the Amarant, but also a spot on the podium overall, which doesn't really matter at all, really, for the points tally. But I think the drivers would like that accolade if they can get it. And this battle for P2 in the Amarant going on between Rob Whitney and Paul Millman. We saw these two battling for quite some time actually in race 1, so good to see that it will be continuing on here in race 2. Going a little bit wide is Rob Whitney. Paul Millman playing it a little bit safer. Has that cost him, in fact, though? Maybe he needs to be a little bit brave. Maybe he needs to push the boat out a little bit more. Don't want to push the boat out too much, because here being Yas Marina, you end up in a boat. Very, very distinct possibility. And I can't imagine the insurers will be too pleased with that. Would be quite an expensive instance. As we see Rob Whitney heading down towards turn 7 once again, about 6 seconds off the lead of this race. Alan Matthews is absolutely walking away with it as things stand. It must be said, he's doing a very impressive job in P1. 2 seconds clear of Jack Hodson. Now we can see some impressive pace from Jack Hodson. In fact, 1:57.9 on that previous lap. Of course, the previous lap being the first lap of the race. So we'll see what he can do on this lap as Alan Matthews goes purple through sector 1, which is no major shock to anyone. And that purple was a 35.2 compared to Alex Smith's 37.2. So not sure what happened there. And then Will Inglis a 35.5. So Will Inglis should be working his way through the field in just a moment's time as well. And here is confirmation of that, heading past Steve Knight as he goes along. Not quite yet, but he's looking up the inside, should be later on the brakes, and gets that move done. Very nice, very easy move for Will Inglis up into P6 on the road now. And of course, P3 still in the pro running there. About 4 seconds off Alex Smith now. Now those two are going to have to play it rather careful, I think. Remember earlier on in race 1 when we were talking about these two working together to try and combat Alan Matthews. They didn't quite do that. I think Will Inglis just turned up the pace somewhat and was able to get past. Now they might be choosing to work together once again, because they've got quite some overtaking to do to catch back up to the lead of this race. Will Inglis now 14 seconds off the lead. Alex Smith now 10 seconds off as Alan Matthews goes quickest in this race overall at 1:50.5. We'll see what Alex Smith and Will Inglis can do. It's not quite there with the 150s just yet. I'm going to mention actually that Jack Hodson on the previous lap absolutely flying along. Went purple in sector 2, that all-important purple sector 2 seems to have made the difference on his lap, and he's only just about a 10th behind Alan Matthews in terms of pacer. So could Jack Hodson, as he gets a little bit more comfortable in the car, a little bit more comfortable with the circuit, as he settles into his groove, could he be within a shout of battling for the lead of this race? Don't count anything out. If one small error occurs for Alan Matthews, that 1.5 second margin might be very easily surmountable. as we head into the later stages of this race, as we see Alex Smith getting overtaken by. In fact, was that getting overtaken by? No, that was Rob Whitney separating Alex Smith and no, it was Paul Millman. In fact, Paul Millman. I think Paul Millman and Alex Smith enjoying a bit of a battle. Apologies for the confusion there. As Paul Millman currently sat in P3, about 0.3 of a second separating these two cars now as we head into Sector 2. Paul Millman defending that inside line, defending it well, and we see half a second separating Paul Millman and Alex Smith. That gap we expect will be closing up at some point now. Paul Millman, as an AM runner, should be conceding the position, although it's just kind of an agreement that we have that the AM runners concede to the pro runners, but I don't mind. If there's an exciting battle going on for the lead of, not for the lead of this race, but for the lead of the AM running at least, although with Rob Whitney being there, they do have their own race to focus on, so I'm sure it will be a fairly quick and easy overtake for Alex Smith, but with the pace that Paul Millman is demonstrating, I'm sure they'll be quite keen to enjoy a bit of a battle between those two, as Jack Hodson posted a very competitive lap there at 150.2. That is the quickest lap of the race so far, so Jack really turning up the pace, really being spurred on by the idea potentially of leading the race overall. He's already leading the AM race by quite some margin, as Paul Millman was at one point in race 1, but let's see if he can do, let's see if Jack Hodson can repeat that in race 2. In fact, it was Jack who led race 1 in the end. We will give you an update on the championship standings at some point in this race, because they have of course changed since that very interesting race 1. And there is Jack Hodson once again with a purple Sector 1, but that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the overtake that Alex Smith has just been able to perform on Paul Millman and find himself in P3 of this race once again, just as he did in race 1. So a very impressive recovery for Alex Smith so far. Still plenty of running to go in this race, luckily for all of us watching, so let's see what he can do with the time remaining. Will he find his way past Jack Hodson? That I'm not quite sure on, because there's just an impressive amount of pace from Jack Hodson so far this evening. Will Inglis, though, clearly eager to climb his way back up to where he feels like he belongs, where we know he's capable of being a 150.5 on that previous lap, so there or thereabouts with the best in the field, and he's just gone purple through Sector 1 with a 34.7, which I believe was a purple in race 1 as well, so the time's already tumbling down a little bit quicker than I'd say they did in race 1. We might see the drivers feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more comfortable with the car and track combination. We might see the times getting even better towards the end of race 2. Alan Matthews taking the crown of fastest lap back off Jack Hodson now with a 150.275, only 0.02 of a second quicker than Jack Hodson's previous best attempt, bearing in mind. As we see that Will Inglis is starting the next lap in P5 now. His car up in front of him next is Paul Millman, about 3 seconds behind, in fact, Alex Smith overall, so very close indeed to one of his nearest rivals. So they've both had a very good recovery given how race 2 started for them. It's not looking too bad indeed, and they should filter back up to where we usually expect to see them. As we see Jack Hodson has hit that 2-second barrier, where unfortunately, despite having some impressive pace indeed, he lost out on the previous lap compared to Alan Matthews. He hasn't quite got enough of a pace advantage, I would say, to really secure that overtake, and for that reason he's still about 2 to 2.5 seconds behind Alan Matthews. So it's good to see an attempt at a charge nonetheless, but might it be too little, unfortunately, for Jack Hodson. Let's see what we can do later on. I believe that was a small corner cut. I don't believe that was intentional. Maybe that's what he's trying. I don't think the stewards will see too kindly to that one. I heavily doubt that is what he's trying. But at 1.8 seconds now between him and Alan Matthews. Yeah, there is confirmation that that sector invalidated. This lap time will be invalidated, so there is a flyer, unfortunately, for him. That might be in part owing to that small cut of the corner there, which I think was just because the car got unsettled under braking. So we should see Jack Hodson still within that 2-second margin of Alan Matthews. Could be very important indeed. As much as he can keep Alan Matthews honest, that might keep Alan Matthews very much under pressure as he now enters the 149s, 149.97, which I don't believe he achieved in race 1 actually, so impressive to see from Alan Matthews. Yes, we can see the cars behind start to back Alan Matthews into a corner, maybe wear out his tyres too quickly. We could have an interesting dynamic occurring between the top end of the field later on into the race. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the field, Paul Millman and Will Inglis about 0.3 of a second apart from each other. We've just entered the very difficult to follow section that is Sector 1. And now we'll see Will Inglis attempt to find his way past. Has he done it into braking, under braking into turn 5? Not quite yet. We'll probably have to wait until braking zone for turn 8 for another attempt from Will Inglis as he hangs it round that left-hander, of course, where some championships were made just a year ago in Formula 1. Can you believe that's been over 12 months already? Time has absolutely flown by, and there is Will Inglis now using that push-to-pass system to try and close up that gap to Paul Millman, the car up in front. He had the slipstream as well. He's now side by side. In fact, edges out in front. Has the inside line under braking. Should secure the move. Has the switch back to negotiate now and does so with ease. It is now Will Inglis in P4. Paul Millman P5. So 3 seconds separating Alex Smith and Will Inglis now, as Will Inglis probably much more focused on that next pro car in front of him as we get ever closer to the halfway stage in this race. As we remain on board with Paul Millman and Will Inglis and heading towards the end of the lap once again. Will Inglis not quite romping away with it as potentially we expected. He's on the previous lap posted a 1 minute 51.0 compared to Alex Smith's 150.2. Unfortunately for him, not quite where he wants to be in terms of catching up to Alex Smith. And this is, you can see this sometimes where racing is all about kind of the rhythm that you settle into as well. And of course, Will Inglis's rhythm will be very much affected in comparison to race 1. Race 1, he was so honed in on just trying to find a way past Alan Matthews, had learnt the way that Alan Matthews raced, that maybe race 2, where he's got to work his way through the field, and of course being unsettled by the incident earlier on at the very start of the race, he's just not quite been able to find his groove just yet. We might see that as the car maybe comes through with the fuel load getting lighter. We might see that later into the race. He could be preserving his tyres for a last-minute charge as well. So we'll see what happens with that one. Meanwhile, Paul Brady is setting personal best sectors at the bottom end of the field there in P7 on the road at the moment. His best lap 153.6, which is there or thereabouts where he was in quali, I believe, 153.2 being his best lap of this session so far. Steve Knight, I just want to give a mention to 302 kilometres an hour through the speed trap there, absolutely blistering. That speed trap is just before the entry into turn 8, right before you stomp on the brakes to try and bring the car to a halt. Yeah, 302 kilometres an hour, that is something else. In fact, it is very unique in the field. And unfortunately for him, maybe as we were talking about it towards the end of qualifying start of the race 1, low downforce setup, just not where you need to be in terms of racecraft, unfortunately. And we're seeing Steve Knight currently in P8, but don't count anything out. We saw in the AM running the order completely changed based on the events that occurred in that race, so I wouldn't be too surprised if the same thing, because in this one it's all to play for no matter where you are in the field, as I'm slowly doing some UI feng shui, so apologies for that one. Alan Matthews still leads this race, and in fact his gap to the car in P2 has grown ever wider. A very impressive drive from him all weekend, it must be said. Didn't quite have it in qualifying, which we've seen on a couple of occasions. In fact, Alan Matthews seems to be potentially a little bit more skewed towards that ultimate race pacing compared to setting an absolutely blistering lap in qualifying. So of course race days where the points are scored, so it's worked out well for him, that strategy, in this season so far, because in terms of the point standings he's doing a very nice job indeed. Speaking of, 331 points to Alan Matthews' name compared to Will Inglis with 304, so that gap building ever so slightly. So Will Inglis really has his work cut out for him if he wants to close that gap, which is not looking his way, unfortunately, in race 2 so far. Of course, Will Inglis currently running in P3. He will score 15 points to Alex Smith's 18, and to Alan Matthews is 25. And that could mean that the championship is pretty much sealed for Alan Matthews as we exit this weekend. We'll have to wait and see for that one, though, as Jack Hodson, I think, has just had a couple of difficulties because that gap between him and Alan Matthews just grown ever further, and he's now potentially under threat from Alex Smith. Not that that will change his race for him. Of course, he'll still score the same number of points being an AM driver, but it's nice to see an impressive drive. Nonetheless, it would be a shame to see it come to a bit of a premature end through some form of external difficulties. As we see Alan Matthews then 331 points to his name in P1. Then we have Will Inglis, currently P5 in this race, P2 in the championship with 304 points now. Alex Smith then with 249. And then we have in P4 in the championship, we have Barry Clayton, as mentioned, not here this evening, unfortunately, 226, Andrew Ram 141, John Baker 135, George 120, James Atkins 96, Andrew Harvey 72, Matt Daly 68, Colin Keeve 43, and Andrew Whitehead 14. And then in terms of the AM running, we have Paul Millman leading the AM charge, now 1 point clear of Rob Whitney, so he is looking to extend that gap ever more, and the AM race will absolutely go down to the wire next in the next fortnight if this is the way things are looking, with 308 points to Paul Millman's name. And then in P2, just one car behind, in fact, P2 to Paul Millman is Rob Whitney with 307 points to his name. Then we have Paul Brady still within a shout of it with 283 points to his name. And then we have Guy Silver 210, Steve Knight 148. And then we have Jack Hodson, in fact, on 43 points now, so he'll be looking to take away a good number of points from this weekend as well. And that does it for the championship standings. And in fact, we see Alan Matthews has extended his gap to the rest of the field even more as we approach the final stages of this race. Now there's half a second separating Jack Hodson and Alex Smith. That half a second has closed up even more. Have I just noticed actually? Is that hotel changing colours? Does it real life? Is it? If it is, that is a very nice little touch on this mod. It might not be that. I think that is just my very poor eyesight, clearly. Or maybe just my lack of general intelligence. One of the two, as we stay on board with Jack Hodson heading down the start-finish straight. Alan Matthews actually posting a purple sector 3 on that lap time, on that time round, on 149.4. Very impressive race pace indeed from Alan Matthews' car. It's exactly what he needs at this stage in the race. 15 seconds clear of the rest of the field. Race 2 even more dominant than race 1, as we see Alex Smith trying to hang it around the outside there. Goes late on the brakes into turn 5 rather. Fantastic move from Alex Smith, and that was pretty much secured by the fact that heading through turn 4 he rode over the curbs, jumped into the air, was able to touch down without losing the car, and was just so brave and so late on the brakes. That is a fantastic move from Alex Smith there into P2 then for the pro runner. And we see the cars behind using that push-to-pass system there in the background, or you see Will Inglis on that push-to-pass system as well. He's trying his best to catch up to the cars in front of him. Let's see if he can do so as we head into the second, or rather the final sector of this lap in just a few moments' time. Apologies, we will just have a brief interlude on the order. We might drop out on the order for just a couple of minutes. We'll be back in just a moment though. and we're just under 5 minutes to go in this race now. We're on board with Will Inglis, who is clear of Paul Millman by a good few seconds, in fact, and he is doing his best to catch up to Alex Smith, the car in front. If we compare their current pace at the moment, it's looking like it's in the hands of Will Inglis, but not quite, because we see Alex Smith just ahead into the 153s in terms of the best lap. I believe that Alex Smith has pretty much been illegal on every single one of them, if I'm not mistaken, and as such he's posted a 2:03, and that is a big tank slapper for Will Inglis. Can he catch it? No, he can't, unfortunately. Whereabouts was that? I can tell you that was on the exit of turn 4 there. Unfortunately, that has really put a bit of a stop to his momentum now. As we see him with just over pretty much 4 minutes to go in this race, he's back down in P4. Paul Millman is ahead once again, and that is an absolute disaster for Will Inglis. So clearly doing his best to catch up, and unfortunately something in the car just deciding that it doesn't want to play ball anymore, fortunately for him. Meanwhile, Alan Matthews, no major complaints for him, of course, doing a very nice job of leading this race, 20 seconds ahead of the rest of the field. And Alex Smith once again in a slight bit of no man's land there, really, with 10 seconds between him and P3. Very nice job indeed. Then we have Will Inglis about 2 seconds behind Paul Millman once again, but under pressure, in fact, from Rob Whitney. Rob Whitney would, I'm sure, would like to politely say, please get out of the way, Will Inglis, because I'm going to try and do one last-minute charge to the car up in front, but hasn't been able to make that work just yet. As we remain on board with Rob Whitney and Will Inglis, two closest cars on track, but not quite as close anymore. The back end of Rob Whitney's car just stepping away from him as we were heading through turn 12, turn 13 there, unfortunately for him, as Alex Smith posts a personal best lap time there, which I believe, was that valid? No, it wasn't. Unfortunately, there, another invalid lap time for Alex Smith, but still reasonably competitive nonetheless. On that previous lap, I'd like to mention that Alan Matthews still in the low 150s, very low, in fact 150.0, so still putting in some impressive pace. He's the quickest car on track at this moment in time. Very impressive given how long he's been leading and how much he's been putting in a charge for. As Rob Whitney and Will Inglis actually making contact with one another as we head through turn 5 and turn 6. Let's watch him now as we enter sector 2. Near enough neck and neck now. Rob using that, in fact both cars using that push to pass system. Rob maybe trying to use it a little bit early to try and catch up. He's got the inside line, has Rob. I think he's got a little bit less aero on his car as well, which could be assisting things here as we enter the braking zone. There's a switch back there and there's big contact between the two there as the back end of Rob Whitney's car was tagged ever so slightly. Maybe Rob braking slightly earlier than Will, as Will tried to dart across the circuit to get the inside line there. Rob luckily able to rejoin very quickly indeed, which is good to see, but that was quite the high-speed impact for Rob's car there. He's only got another couple of minutes in this race to limp it home for, but hopefully he, for his own sake, he doesn't lose that position to Jack Hudson, which Jack unfortunately not having a race to remember in race 2, much like he did in race 1, at one point on the podium, now down in P6 on the road, and potentially putting the pressure on Rob Whitney in a moment's time, as Alan Matthews posts a purple sector 3. That was a 148.9 that last lap. Very fast time indeed. I can tell you why. It's because it was invalid, unfortunately, heading through sector 2. In fact, we're starting to see a few cars going invalid through sector 2. That's probably something to do with the fact that one of them is hurtling towards a wall at 150, which I've just remembered about now. As Rob Whitney probably hasn't, because he probably got quite the response from the steering wheel for that one. As we head around that final corner then and come across the line, and it is Rob Whitney who is still at the moment ahead of Jack Hudson, but for how long? They are so close together, these two cars, as the timer nearly hits 0. The camera has a small wobble, but we carry on. About 0.4 seconds separating these two. We expect that gap to increase. We head around that very difficult, very technical sector 1. And what happened to Rob Whitney's car there? That was magic. Did he just teleport? Not quite sure what went on there, as he just kind of seemed to dart across the screen. It might have been a trick of the camera. But he's now in P5 is Jack Cotton. Jack Cotton got a little bit wide actually on the exit of turn 8. That will help turn 7 rather. That will help Rob Whitney immensely. Gets a much cleaner exit. Doesn't even have to use that push to pass system. Might use it now because it seems that Jack Cotton is back up to speed and they are near enough. Makes no difference side by side heading into the braking zone. Rob Whitney has that inside line as he did on the previous lap. It all went wrong for him on the previous lap. It's going to go less wrong for him this time around, but still pretty wrong because under braking around the outside, Jack Cotton takes the position back. Has the inside line for turn 9. But that compromises him on the exit and allows heading into turn 10 Rob Whitney to have more speed there, gets a nose out and is now looking rather good for turn 11 coming up now. Enters the braking zone using that push to pass system just before, defends around the outside there. Fantastic move from Rob Whitney rather, and still ahead of Jack Cotton for the time being, but for how long? We have in fact started the final lap of the race. Rob Whitney goes wide. Meanwhile, where is Alan Matthews? Alan Matthews is heading round to turn 4 as we speak, but all the battling action is going on down in P5 and P6. Rob Whitney out ahead of Jack Cotton once again, of course. But for how long this battle is almighty between these two cars, and we'll wait to see how it finishes in just a few moments time, as I believe Alan Matthews is getting ready to head into sector 2 now, and he's already heading down that long back straight, in fact using that push to pass system for one final time down the long back straight. It has been an absolutely fantastic weekend for Alan Matthews. Didn't quite get there in qualifying, as we've seen, as I mentioned, we've seen that before, but absolutely nailed start of race 1 and nailed start of race 2 as well. He was in P3, in fact, starting the reverse grid race, and was just miles ahead of everyone else in terms of 0 to 60 time there, really off the line, and that has really paid dividends in both of these races, in fact, because Yas Marina, a circuit that is notoriously tricky to overtake on, Alan Matthews got those overtakes in early when it matters, and as such he now finds himself leading both races, leading the championship by a more comfortable margin as well. It has been a fantastic effort all year for Alan Matthews, and he's reaping the rewards of that effort as well as he heads around the final few corners of this lap for a final time this weekend, of the penultimate weekend in fact of this season. It has been a fantastic drive from all drivers, in fact. This weekend has been a very interesting weekend, even with only 8 cars on the grid. As we head through turn 20 now for one final time. Positions trading throughout the rest of the field, so we'll have to go on board with that in a moment's time. But for one final time this weekend, congratulations, Alan. You take the race 2 victory, and that's utter dominance, as I said, in race 2. Race 1 was much trickier for him, and I think we're going to see some victory donuts now. But unfortunately, we might have to shy away from them. And there we go into this slide now, because the battle between Rob Whitney and Jack Cotton still ongoing at this stage in the race, as we should see some donuts from Alex Smith as well. But Rob Whitney and Jack Cotton still battling out. Rob Whitney looking a little bit more comfortable this time around. This, of course, matters for Rob Whitney because he wants to try and take away as many points as possible from Paul Millman. Wants to try and decrease the advantage that Paul Millman has by as much as possible. So we see Rob Whitney then heading into the penultimate corner now. It is looking rather good for him, must be said, as we see Will Inglis will come home to take to round out the podium in the pro race here, and then taking the race victory is Paul Millman. Rob Whitney comes home P2, Jack Cotton rounding out the podium in that one as well. So a fantastic weekend all around for these drivers, and we're enjoying some victory donuts as well, which just makes things even better. As we see Jack Cotton absolutely hurtling across the screen there. Luckily was able to stop it for the tyre barrier. I'm not quite sure. In fact, one thing I do know is those rear tyres are destroyed. Paul Brady joining in before becoming on P7 on the road, and then Steve Knight rounding out the running in P8. That's been a very exciting weekend indeed for round 11 here at Yas Marina. Don't go anywhere, because in a fortnight's time we have the finale for the season at the brand new Las Vegas circuit. It'll be very, very interesting to see how that goes. So until then, I will catch you next time. Thank you very much. Or I will try to, if my monitors can decide that they want to allow me to with my mouse. But there we go. I will catch you next time. Thank you very much for watching, and good night.